Okay, so Imran and I have worked together at British Telecom, and hence the reason I'm here with you guys, and I'm incredibly pleased to do that. Imran suggested that I talk about Agile, beyond Agile sort of thing. And I would say at the moment, most of the Agile that I come across is around software engineering. And I think the next stage of Agile is actually for business teams. I'm talking about, I was coaching in a place called, there's a lot of people here from Northants, from Experian in Nottingham. And those guys, coaching software teams, people from marketing came to me and said, John, can you help us with Agile for marketing? And some people came from HR and said, look, we want to know about Agile for HR and what's the benefits and how could it work and so on. So I think Agile is, it's here to stay. It's about new ways of working. It's also about the way in which we treat people. And I think this is incredibly important. There's I think it's a Manpower report, but it's certainly a report which has got global traction, and I think it's been reported in things like the Harvard Business Review and so on, that only 30% of employees are actively engaged in their workforce, right? And which means that 70% of people, employees who come to work, leave their emotions and their intelligence at the door when they clock in. And I think Agile is one of the things that you will see collectively. Nearly every report that you see about Agile is mentioning that teams find it more satisfying and teams get more energy from it and teams find it more engaging with their work, and using collective intelligence of individuals rather than the brain of one with command and control, I think is a way of actually improving this engagement statistic. And I think this is incredibly important because, if an employee's got a workforce of 10,000 people, and then you're saying that only 3,000 people of those are actually engaged. Just think of the waste and the loss of that human capital and so on. So I think beyond Agile is Agile for business teams. So I started to think about some of the problems that Agile teams start to have. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides because you've given me an introduction. So I just got a few qualifications, DA, disciplined, Agile, safe, and so on, just to mention those. But apart from that, I'm currently involved in a transformation. I'm doing lean portfolio management in an investment bank, a global investment bank, and that's 6,000 people and about 650 teams. I think we've got where I'm doing LPM, and we've got that piloting, and we're introducing Agile ways of working. And previously, I was with a telecoms provider and there's about 4,800 people in that division, where we were looking at technical and non-technical and business change Agile. So I've got a bit of experience that I can build on to do this. I wanted to just talk to you about a bit of systems theory. Okay. Anybody know anything about systems theory? What's it about? Anybody can answer. It's not a rhetorical question.
It's about seeing system as a whole.
Yeah, Mars, you're absolutely right. It is Mars that answered that, wasn't it? Yeah, it is. It's about seeing things as a whole. Anybody else? I'm going to scroll down and ask somebody.
Operations management, 3 Ps,
Operations management, maybe, yes. Okay, look, systems theory is about the fact that in any human endeavor, in any organization, we can view at it as a system, and a system has components, and the effects of the components deliver the output. So a system takes inputs, does something to it, and creates value, okay? So if you're starting to think about projects in waterfall or in agile, in my view, there's three parts to the system, right? There's the product, okay? What we're actually going to produce, what's the desired outcome, and you could define that in terms of OKRs, you could define that in terms of high-level requirements, you could define that in terms of services or availability, you could define it in a number of different ways. That product is got to be produced by a group of people, and in Agile, we talk about small groups of people producing product incrementally, and it's using the skills and the intelligence and the knowledge base of those people to produce a product, right? Those people use a process. Now that process, I'm calling the process in the widest sense. So there's a process about, exploring scope. There's a process about developing something. There's a process about testing it and checking that it's fit for purpose. There's a process about actually deploying it, and so on. So we've got three elements to the system that we've got for producing a solution. Would you agree? Is there any other element you could think of that wouldn't be embroiled in those three areas? Okay. They're great. This is good. Silence. This is normal on Northampton meetups. So anyway, let's take it a step further. How much support does the number one framework in use globally is something called Scrum, right? And we probably got a load of Scrum practitioners on the call. There's 33 of you here. How much support does Scrum give for the product? Go on.
So I would say a fair amount. We have a dedicated role for the product in terms of the product owner.
Yeah.
In the latest Scrum guide, there's the product goal is called out.
Good. Okay. That's great. So I think Scrum's got a lot of support for the product. You're absolutely right. If you think about the sprint review, it's all about the product. Okay, so if you then start to say, okay, let's then look at how much support Scrum gives for the people.
Quite a lot, I would say, because we have the Scrum values of being open, committed, respect, courage.
Great. Okay. So does it tell you how to get to those values?
No.
Okay. Does it talk about beyond the product owner and the Scrum Master and the team? Does it talk about any other roles and responsibilities?
Scrum also talks about the developers.
Yep.
Not just necessarily the developers, but it could include developers, QA, designers, people who are essentially involved in the development of the product.
So it labels the job roles or the types of people, but does it actually tell us what people are gonna do? So no. It doesn't, right? So I would say to you, whereas the product side of this is really well catered for Scrum, I think Scrum is less complete. And I mean, don't forget, Scrum is a purposefully incomplete guide, right? And the purpose of the Scrum guide is to teach you how to do Scrum, right? It's not there to teach you how to do Agile. So, so there's very little, I think, in terms of support for people. What beyond the Scrum ceremonies or events, what guidance does Scrum give you about process?
Daily stand-up calls, reviews, retrospective meetings. Again, I guess these are parts of the processes that take certain place on a time scale. So if you could classify that, I guess.
Yeah, no, I don't dispute, because those are part of Scrum, right? But if you said, okay, does Scrum teach you how to gather requirements?
No.
Does Scrum teach you how to? Does Scrum teach you how to estimate?
No.
You know, does Scrum teach you how to refine a backlog, or even looking at sizing of components and so on? So what I'm saying to you is, our number one Agile framework that most people should get trained in actually only deals with to any degree of robustness, one part of the system. Okay, so there's some gaps, and Agile Scrum covers this by saying it's a purposely incomplete framework. So when I started to evaluate the performance of novice Agile teams, I've met lots of places where people have gone out to a training course and they've had their Scrum training. The product owners have gone to product owner Scrum training. The team has gone to Scrum training. They come back to the office and they're expected to perform Agile, but actually they can't, because they haven't learned, you know, changing the ways of working and so on. I'll give you a classic example of this. In one of the recent jobs I was coaching, I was asked to go and look at or consider or help a newly formed team. When I looked at the team, they'd taken some people from the design group, they'd taken some people from the quality group, from the development group, they'd taken some people from the testing group, and I think there was an architect in there as well. And they put them into a Scrum training, and then when they said, right, let's start Scrum. What do you think I found when I looked at their process inside the Scrum team?
We work in silos still.
You've got it, exactly. Yeah. They're still doing exactly what they did before, but standing up every morning around a whiteboard, right? Okay, so do you think that gives them a performance improvement?
No.
Okay, so I'm not here to knock Scrum, but I'm here to point out to you, it is a purposely incomplete framework, right? And so what I was trying to do with my novice teams was looking at, can we define something which gives them a more complete story than what Scrum does? And can we help particularly the non-technical teams to use something that could be more fit for purpose? So if I looked at the product side of things, this is really covered quite nicely by, let me just move this because I want to just see that. Oh, damn. Right, so the first line I've got is the product piece, right? This is the piece that I had in that in the top right hand quadrant not quadrant, whatever it is, with the third of the diagram, right? And this is defining that solution. That solution could be the outcome of a merger or acquisition. The solution could be a organizational change, or whatever it is, all right? What we need to do is to make clarity about that. You need to get people to align to that goal and so on. The next piece is about, okay, let's start to get a backlog. Let's start to break that down into items which a team can then produce. And let's work on that and come up with, you know, how we're going to deploy that. then we're doing, because Agile is all about incremental delivery, right? Let's define what those increments are. And those increments need to be viable increments, because if you're talking about business change, or you're talking about cultural change, or you're talking about creating a new legal entity, there will be certain steps that you take that you would need to make sure that you complete. Otherwise, you might open the business to either a political or operational or financial risk that you wouldn't want to do. So it's important to develop an increment definition that is feasible, viable, and so on. The last part of that solution review, and I'll go back to the Scrum piece, is actually getting feedback of those stakeholders, right? So there we've got a line, which I'm going to call the solution line or the product line, which gives us all the different bits that we need to do in mapping out what a team needs to do in order to produce a solution. So, for example, where we're doing that solution goal and where we're doing that backlog preparation, in the guidebook that I've got for Agile Lineout, we've got things like benefits mapping, so that you can actually break down the components of a solution and identify the benefits that you've got, and so on. Okay. The next step is to look at the means of production. Now, the interesting thing with the means of production is I've done some research on how teams define their work, and what I've come up with some stuff. If anybody's come across a book by Richard Hackman called High Performing Teams, or Creating High Performing Teams, you'll find that Hackman starts to talk about how teams work together and get mobilized and so on. And quite often what happens is the team starts to understand the goal of its work, and then starts to plan very early on, and then starts to come up with a way of working. Now, in that mobilization and planning, we've got, you know, things like estimating and things like referential estimating and these sort of things, and sequential planning and dependencies and all that sort of stuff. Then we've got the equivalent of a daily stand-up. Now, I actually think the Scrum is quite ineffective, because a lot of Scrum Masters basically say, what have you done today? What are you going to do tomorrow? Have you got any blockers? And that seems to be a very passive type of inspecting of progress. Now, if you look at the latest version of the Scrum Guide, it's actually talking about inspecting their progress and adapting their plans. Now, I don't see that the 3 questions which typically get asked in the daily Scrum actually reflect that. So what I found in Richard Hackman's book is about the teams, and there's a paper by a woman called Barbara Gersick, and she did a PhD on team performance, and in her team she found that the teams naturally look at what they're doing, and they're looking at, are they getting towards their goal? Okay. Gersick found in that nearly all teams that she reviewed doing a task, at the middle of the task actually did a stop check and decided to change their ways of working. All right. So I've put an enhancement workshop in the middle of what we'll call the iteration, but that will be a sprint if you were using Scrum. Now, the other thing which Hackman says is that if you think of a championship football team, let's talk, because we're in England, let's talk championship soccer. If a team has just won the Champions League, do you think that after they've just finished that final, that they're in a position to learn? And I would like an answer to this. Do you think that they're in a position to learn? They've just lifted the cup.
Not immediately.
Definitely not, right? Because they want to celebrate, right? If they've just lost the cup, are they in a position to learn?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Not immediately again.
Not immediately again.
A little bit.
Right, because they need to deal with their emotions and things like this, right? So if you think about us in a Scrum team, having that retrospective at the end of the sprint may not be the right place psychologically for the retrospective, and that could be part of the reasons why most of us Scrum coaches actually struggle with the retrospective, and that's why you get, you know, pizza type examples of retrospectives and boats and all the rest of it, because the team is, if they've just crossed the line and they've just managed to get the things done, are they really in the same mental state as the football team? If they've really struggled and got something that they were really proud of and then got really hammered in the sprint review because the stakeholders have changed their mind or found that they've gone off on a dead end or whatever. So I think that we the psychological place for that enhancement workshop, the retrospective in Scrum, is probably in the wrong place. And I've had some Scrum Masters and coaches do just move the retrospective into the middle of the Scrum, into the middle of the sprint. And actually it's had huge benefits to them. If you've listened to a sport analogy, you can hear quite often, you can hear somebody say that was a game of two halves. And what's happened in the middle is that the team has gone off, they've had a coaching session or conversation with their coach, they've changed the tactics and they've come back and they've won the game. Okay, if you look at a lot of American football sports, they have timeouts and they're coaching in the game. Having that enhancement workshop enables us to say, not how did it go, but how is it going? And it allows us to make corrective actions so that we actually achieve our goal. So if there's one thing I would say to you from this session, and this is an experiment that you can all try, is to move that enhancement workshop, that retrospective, to the middle of the sprint and look at asking different questions. Because I think, again, just like Scrum, the questions that we get trained or people become used to asking, look, how did it go? What didn't go so well? What can we change? Doesn't really do justice to the inspection and quality improvement aspirations of Scrum. So in the inspection activity, in the enhancement workshop, I recommend that you look at the questions in the Scrum Guide and actually say there's two things the Scrum Guide says about retrospectives, and that is, the question is, how can we improve quality and how can we improve our effectiveness? Those are the two questions that are there in the Scrum Guide. So I would suggest, as an experiment, guys and ladies, have a go at putting your enhancement workshop, your retrospective, in the middle, and ask the specific questions that are in the Scrum Guide. How can we improve quality? How can we improve effectiveness? I guarantee that you'll find that the teams will be more engaged and more open to making improvements for continuous delivery, for continuous improvement, rather. The last thing that the Gerslick
John.
Yeah.
John, there is a question. I suppose somebody has raised the hand.
Sir, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just something just occurred to me. I quite like the idea of moving the enhancements workshop, as you called it, to the middle of the sprint. What I'm concerned about is the impact on the sprint goal. So at the start of the sprint, you commit to a sprint goal, right? You know, via whatever it is in terms of deliverables, etc. And you know what your goal is. You have an idea of what that goal is. You respond to that goal as you go along. Now, the enhancement workshop or / retrospective may or may not impact on that sprint goal, depending on what the outcomes are vis-a-vis, you know, in relation to improving quality, in relation to improving effectiveness.
So I would say it would strengthen the sprint goal, right? I think it's a great question, because if you're asking the question, how do we become more effective? It's becoming more effective to deliver the sprint goal, right? And if you say, how can we improve our quality? We're all trying to get everything right first time. So again, it's making sure that we achieve that sprint goal. So I don't think, if you were going to change, I'd get very uncomfortable if the retrospective or that workshop changed the goal, because unless, of course, I'm a firm believer in, if a team is doing significant change, it may get some feedback, and I'm calling it progression metrics. So let's say that a team has to improve, I don't know, customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction, and it gets a load of data back from the customers or employees to say that the things that it was going to do in this sprint is not actually delivering the expected outcomes that they perceived. In that case, you might then want to change and go into a replanning session. Now, whether that would cause you to abort a sprint, it might do. And then replan.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, because there's no point in doing stuff that's just waste, you know. But that's only if you've got back that negative feedback, and you've got progression metrics.
Yeah.
But incredibly good question. Thank you. The other thing in Gerslick's piece, whereas the team wants to get going and it starts checking that it's going to get there, and then it does its workshop, what they then do is always, when they're inspecting at the end, is they then start, are we going to get there? Are we going to get there? And then at that point, they might be, if somebody's got more work on their plate, they might be starting to spread the love around in terms of, you know, somebody else doing some of the work and so on. So that inspection for completion is all about, are we going to get there? And that's all about relating to the sprint goal. So in the top line, we've got the product piece. In the bottom line, we've got the project delivery piece. The thing that holds it all together, obviously, is the teamwork, right? And quite a lot of us talk about team building, and an incredibly important part of being a Scrum Master or a coach is team building. But do we really understand how to build a team? You know, apart from, you know, having pizzas or going down the curry house together, is that really building a team? Now, I've got some work, and I'll talk to you about it in a minute, but there are some models that I found that will help you look at team building, and it is based on the work of things like the fifth dimension and so on. So and a model based by people called Dickinson and McIntyre. Then we'll talk about working as a team, and working as a team is about, you know, roles and responsibilities with the team, who's going to be doing, let's say, who's going to do the status reports if they've got to produce a status report, who's responsible for compliance if they've got compliance, all of that. Who, you know, if they've got some less experienced members on the team, is there somebody supporting, maybe they're doing peer programming or something like this. All of that team working stuff is an important part of getting the team to work efficiently. And in there you could have a working agreement or a social charter or whatever that would be getting them to document their ways of working so that they can then look at them in the retrospective and so on. They've also got to think about how they deal with external relationships, because you've got to be, you know, if you've got stakeholders, you've got to deal with those, and you've got to give them information, and you've got to receive information from those stakeholders. So there's some pieces about external relationships at the stakeholder level. There's also some pieces about external relationships with other teams that need to be managed. So for example, if you've got a component team that's delivering to you, or you are a component delivering to somebody else, then there's some external relationships which are cross-team, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're part of stakeholders. There's also some bits about, you know, communities or what's the word, where you get the not communities, where you get, you know, building skill sets and so on, which would be part of that. Last but not least is, while the team is working, has anybody come across the idea, when you're doing training, they get a parking lot, and that parking lot is usually for the trainer to keep his timetable going and put things which are outside the scope of the training onto a parking lot and put it onto a board that they can then deal with at the end of the program or the end of the course. Now, what I found is that it's great with a team to say, you know, they suddenly find they're in the middle of something and they find they could really understand a bit more about XYZ or estimating or risk management or robotics or big data or whatever it is, right? And typically they can write up on their radiator in their team environment, we'd like to know more about this, and then they can put it on their improvement backlog. So what I've got in the middle of this is a proper approach to making sure that a novice agile team starts to think about how they're going to work as a team, okay? How they're going to work together, how they're going to be external relationships, how they're going to do team learning. The first thing you've got as a coach, and at least as a Scrum Master, is to take a co-located working group and turn it into a team, because we all know that teams perform better than groups, right? So there's this element that we need to start to think about. So I called it line out because I've got the two lines which mirror the two lines in the rugby piece, and I've got the team working, which, if you like, is the mirrors the ball going down the center of the line. But the other thing about agile, about rugby lineouts, is that the actual play in the lineout changes according to the position on the field. If the team is defending, the lineout structure, the tactics, the approach is different to if they're attacking. So if they're defending, they might decide not to jump, they may go try and counter them all, they might do all sorts of things in order to make sure that the opposing team do not score. If they're at the other end of the field, then they're making decisions about how they're going to attack. They're looking for scoring opportunities. How are they going to get the ball? And there's a totally different set of strategies, all well rehearsed, and so on. So what I'm thinking is that the team at the beginning of each iterations needs to understand their context. Okay, take it at the team level. You may have had somebody leave the team, or somebody may go be sick, or we may get a new team member. So that team building line and those work that they've done and so on might need to change. If they get feedback on the solution or the product, right, that might mean that they've got to change something or alter something they've already built, or change the plans according to what the new requirement that's coming from the stakeholders. If they're looking at their enhancement workshop and they've decided that they need to improve their quality approach to quality, they might decide in the next sprint that they want to increase the amount of automated testing and so on. So at the beginning, we've got a thing where we're looking at what has happened in the overall project in the last 2-3 weeks, whatever the duration of the iteration was, and then decided what's changed and what are we going to take that into our mobilization and planning. If anybody has coached sprint planning, you will realize that at the beginning of the sprint planning, they don't just look at the backlog, they also do a contextual assessment. All I've done is actually formalize that a bit and spread it out a bit to actually include the teamwork as well as the delivery piece, as well as the product solution piece. So it actually happens in real life, but what I've done is formalized it to make sure that novice teams realize that they've got to do that. So that's the line out. What do you think?
I think it looks like a solid framework. How is it going with your teams, John? How well is it being adopted?
It's going very well. I'll tell you where it's going particularly well, and that's in the transformation world. What we're doing is we're using it for planning and working on a team. We're coming up with our plan, our 30, 60, 90-day goals, and working, and that's working very well. We're doing retrospectives, that enhancement workshop. We're not waiting until the end of the quarter or the 30, 60, 90 days to do that. In fact, in some places we've been using, if a team member has come up with an issue or a challenge, then we do a retrospective to try and understand what we can improve and so on. So it's having some great results. I'm also finding that people are doing the experiment I suggested and doing the enhancement workshop at the beginning of this, in the middle of the sprint. And that also is helping Scrum teams.
Thanks, John. It's really interesting. Thank you for bringing this to us today. I like the bit at the beginning, the context assessment, because I think context and understanding where you are is really important. I suppose the thing, and I think you may have answered this already when you were talking about the rugby analogy with the line out, but I'm not very familiar with rugby, so I wonder if you can help me, because it looks like quite a linear progression from left to right. But I think what you were suggesting was actually you use that context assessment to actually decide the order in which you might do these things.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing I would say to you is that in terms of, you know, you've got this image of a curling round circle with Scrum. The image I've got for Lineout is like a series of steps. So what we're looking for is progression towards the solution or product goal, and also performance improvement suggested by the enhancement workshop and the team learning and the context assessment.
Thanks. So where could we see that image? Is that part of the presentation, or?
Yeah, I'll give you a guide to it just in a second. Yes, definitely. It's there. Yeah. Ritfars, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, hi there. Once again, just a quick question. This particular framework, can it be used specifically as per iteration or as per whole project? How do you find it?
Obviously, you just like Scrum, you would do this over a number of iterations in order to complete a project, right?
I see.
So what it's done is I've tried to formalize some of the steps that I think teams need to make in order to deliver a high value product or solution. But I've also tried to get, guidance so that people can understand, a novice team in particular, they know where to start with this.
That answer is very clear. Thank you.
There's 20 things in the chat. Is there any questions in the chat?
No questions, I don't think, John, but just some great conversation. Great conversation happening.
Okay. Anything you want to call out?
Just one more question, I guess. What happens after the framework? Do you have any sort of continuation after this particular iteration run?
Well, it's just like Scrum. You keep repeating until you've delivered the product goal, right?
I see, clear.
Yeah. So I mentioned this goal about team building, and I'm conscious of time, right? I found this paper by a group of people called Dickinson and McIntyre, and it comes from about 1994, and they talk about a teamwork model, and this actually gives you a lot of data about, it's 1992, it gives you a conceptual model for teamwork and measuring teamwork, and the essence of teamwork, they say, is around communication, and that is borne out by, Sengi's fifth dimension, where it talks about team growth and learning and so on. So the first piece is obviously about communicating the inputs. You've got then talking about team orientation as to what their goal is and so on, and that then leads to team leadership and so on. Then you've got throughput, where the team starts to communicate around monitoring their progress and so on, and then feedback. If people are not performing, or people are having difficulties, or people need help, then you've got this backup behavior, which they call out about team members supporting each other. And then the output is around communication again. It's around coordination and making sure that the execution of the activities are timely and integrated and so on. So this gives us a teamwork model that when we're starting to look at coaching a team, right, you can start to look at team building in a structured way, which allows you, when you think that teamwork is the foundation of agile projects, this gives you a bit of structure around it in order to start to diagnose what's happening with your team and helping them in terms of their performance. When they're talking about team leadership, they're not talking about managers in the team. What they're talking about is behaviors. You know, you always get one guy who's the strongest, I don't know, developer, and one guy that's the strongest designer or whatever, right? It's leadership, people who do leadership roles within the team, excuse me, rather than providing direction. It's about, you know, people who gather others around them in order to produce it. The monitoring piece fits quite nicely with that, inspecting performance and inspecting completion. So that gives us what we're doing is observing the activities and making sure that the team is performing as a unit and they're getting towards their desired outcome. So all of this provides that learning loop that we've got there in terms of the team starting to learn together. And there's, you know, Sengi, I think it says that the team, the way to get to a high performance team is actually to get the team learning together. Imran.
John, a quick one. I was thinking, does your framework recommend any metrics for team performance, for your product output, outcomes? Are there any metrics?
Yes, there are some metrics in there around, for example, flow metrics, and cycle time and lead time monitoring, and also quality metrics as well. So yes, there are.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And they've also some artifacts, you know, things like, for example, the working agreement, things like the learning log, things like the backlog, and all those sort of things are all defined there, and the benefits map and so on.
Okay, great. Thank you.
John, so the Scrum Guide is famously light on details, and you know, 16 pages. I can't remember how long it is, but it's very small. How fleshed out is your framework? How big is the document?
So I've created a A4. Sorry, A5 is smaller than A4, isn't it? An A5 PDF type booklet type size, and it runs to, I think it's 26 pages, where the Scrum Guide is at A4 is around 12 pages. So I think it's comparable in length, but it's again, it's deliberately incomplete. But what I tried to do was to get it more complete so that teams could ask more questions and know what questions to ask, if you see what I mean. In addition to the guide, I've also got a handbook, which I'm currently reworking. And that handbook runs to about 20,000 words. So it's quite significant, but I'm seeing that as being, if you like, the equivalent of your 2-day Scrum course. So and then obviously we will develop a Scrum a Lineout course to go with it.
That's good. Another question. How many teams have you seen this working with, and how many of those were brand new to Agile ways of working, and how many of them maybe had worked with Scrum before and then moved on to this?
I've got some people around the world who are using this. Okay, I'm told that there's one guy in India who's got 3 teams that have done exactly as you said, brand new teams, started out with this instead of Scrum. There's a guy there's a lady in London who works for one of the big retailers, and she has gone as far as doing experiments with the mid-level, doing the enhancement workshop in the middle. And I've got a couple of other people who have done that, one in pharmaceuticals and one in banking, and that has had good effect as well. I myself have got about 5 teams where I've done using these techniques. I'm running a and one of the programs, by the way, is a $60 million activity. And the other, and I've got a transformation activity, which is I ran the transformation activity using this framework, although not explicitly in British Telecom, and I've also doing exactly the same now in my investment bank. So quite a lot of experience from it, but it's still very early days. We only published it in April, so it's still very early days.
Yeah, and do have a question in the chat about where to obtain the handbook.
Okay, it's on LeanPub. Hang on, let me just. I've got it in LeanPub, and it talks about. It's an ebook format, and it's got that there. Agile Lineout, an alternative to Scrum. It's also on Kindle. But what I would say to you is, if you are interested in learning more, I would wait until, well, download it by all means right now, and LeanPub will tell you that there's a new version when I issue it in by the end of the year. But I've substantially reworked it, and in rushing to get it out in April, I realized that some of the proofreading was not as good as it should have been. So there are some typos and mistakes in the document at the moment, which I am quickly correcting or more rigorously correcting, put it that way. So that's the line out. And then in terms of my coach's cookbook, that's available from Amazon in terms of providing some of the coaching guide. Now, that coach's cookbook is not about Agile Lineout, which I've been talking to you about today, but it's about some of the lessons from coaching Agile teams.
Can I barge in with a quick question? Do you provide any courses that are accredited and or UK government subsidized courses that could lead into potential apprenticeships in the discipline of Agile, Scrum, in project management in general? Thank you.
Great question, Rivaz. It is planned, but we haven't done it yet. Okay. My thought processes are, let's get the book more robust so that it's more accurate in terms of, the proofreading and all this sort of stuff. What I did on the second version was actually got a lot of the coaching materials in mixed with the methodology. The feedback is from people who have used the book is that it's better to separate it so that teams can actually see what is the methodology and coaches can see what is the coaching approaches. So for example, a lot of the coaching is around using something called the system of profound knowledge, which is a Deming technique, which talks about, people, the process, variation, all the stuff that I talked to you about in the first slide is all there and more explicit about understanding and so on. So I've done that and got it set out that way. But we will get there, but the book was the first thing to get improved.
I see. And one last thing probably for today. Everybody talks obviously about lean and lean management, and particularly I achieved a certificate in lean management. And many people probably got this impression that lean is all about, production, having, neat processes in place. But obviously, from what I've learned is you can definitely apply it even in IT industry by, let's say, reducing waste of absenteeism, et cetera, that can as well likewise impact your project success outcome. And I'm just thinking how lean actually works with Agile and sort of your adjustments in Agile and Scrum. How well do they sort of interact with each other? And do you consider lean as a valid discipline that could be sort of mixed in a hybrid kind of role for any project, service related projects? Thank you.
So absolutely, great question. Thank you for it. I'm just as I said to you, in the investment bank, I'm introducing lean portfolio management for across 6,000 people. That's over, and the budget is, you know, in the billions of dollars rather than millions of dollars. So it's a huge activity that we're doing. How does lean help? Lean helps by, first of all, in the portfolio management, chunking down the work into smaller deliverables so that you can actually produce it more quickly, more frequently, and so on. It's about reducing wait times and work states so that we're analyzing the value stream based on the portfolio management data to be able to do that. Okay, so yeah, totally interlinked and totally together. And in Agile Lineout, in the new version, they will be talking about the lean aspects of the product owner, how the product owner can dissect the solution into iterations and increments so that it can actually improve the rate in which the value is delivered. So great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't pay you for that one, did I?
No, you didn't. I'm actually.
You can send the bill later, okay?
You can send the bill to the Parliament.
All right.
I am envious of Rivers being out for a lovely walk this evening. Some of the clouds looked amazing when we could see the sky earlier. I have one question, and unless anyone else has one.
Go ahead, Tom.
So I think at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about this being applicable outside of the context of engineering teams. I think that was part of your scene setting.
Yes.
So I was just interested. I know you kind of talked about where this might be being used, but I wondered if there was any particular kind of areas of an organization that this has been particularly successful, and how, if they hadn't had experience with Agile, how do they know kind of what kind of cadence to start with, whether there's anything kind of in your framework that talks about, you know, a maximum of 4, like we have in the Scrum guide, 4 weeks that we have in the Scrum guide, or is there any context around that?
Yeah, I think what I've got in here is that the cadence or the sprint length or the iteration length should be short enough to get feedback. Okay, because of the, you know, the plan, do, check, act cycle, but long enough so that it is suitable for the activity. So, for example, if you were doing a cultural change, you're not going to get cultural change in 2-week cycles, right? So you've got to look at slightly longer windows, and there are other activities that you can say the same thing about. So, short enough but long enough is the answer to your question. And yes, definitely that the main place I've really seen benefits is actually in managing a transformation, where you can't necessarily define all the tasks, but you're defining OKRs and the outcomes, and then breaking those down to say, okay, is this getting towards the task? And then on the 30, 60, 90-day cycles, you can actually then either pivot or accelerate depending on the results that you're having.
It's really helpful. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Okay, in the interest of time, I think we'll leave it there. Just take a moment to thank John for bringing his Lineout framework to us. So if you could show your appreciation by a clap or an emoji or a cheer, whatever way. But
hey, thanks, John. Thank you, John.
Thank you for inviting me, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.